Minneapolis, Minnesota, June 7, 1970. The Bryant Junior High School auditorium hummed with the particular energy that only a school talent show can generate. A mixture of nervous anticipation, parental pride, and the barely contained excitement of young performers waiting for their moment in the spotlight. Folding chairs, arranged in neat rows, were filled with families who had come to witness their children's talents, many equipped with cameras and encouraging smiles. The modest stage was decorated with a hand-painted banner proclaiming "Bryant's Got Talent" in enthusiastic block letters. Backstage, which in this context meant the small corridor adjacent to the stage, 23 students in varying states of nervous anticipation waited for their turns to perform. Most clutched instruments, sheet music, or props for their acts, whispering last-minute reminders to themselves or seeking reassurance from friends. Among them, standing slightly apart from the others, was 12-year-old Prince Rogers Nelson. Unlike the other performers in their carefully selected outfits and polished shoes, Prince wore faded jeans with visible patches at the knees, a plain white t-shirt that had seen better days, and, most notably, no shoes at all. His small feet were bare against the cold linoleum floor, his toes occasionally curling and uncurling in what might have been nervousness or simply a child's natural fidgeting. The contrast between his appearance and that of the other contestants was striking, not just in the simplicity of his attire, but in the almost palpable intensity with which he regarded the battered guitar case at his feet. It wasn't his guitar. The instrument belonged to his father, John L. Nelson, a jazz pianist who had reluctantly lent it to his son for this one evening. The relationship between father and son was complex, built on a foundation of shared musical ability, but strained by different artistic visions and the complications of a home life fractured by separation. The guitar represented both connection and division, a link to his father's musical legacy and a step toward Prince's own distinct path. The decision to perform had not come easily. Prince was known throughout Bryant Junior High more for his reticence than his expressiveness, a quiet, sometimes awkward student who kept to himself, who was often teased for his small stature and eccentric interests. Few of his classmates knew about his near-obsessive practice sessions at home, about the hours spent teaching himself to play not just guitar, but also piano, drums, and any other instrument he could access. Even fewer knew about the compositions he had already begun creating, songs that showed a musical understanding far beyond his years. "Prince Rogers Nelson, you're up next," announced Mrs. Wilkins, the music teacher who had organized the talent show. Her tone was gentle, but carried the efficiency of someone managing 23 nervous children through a tightly scheduled program. Prince nodded silently, kneeling to open his father's guitar case. His hands, already showing the calluses of dedicated practice, moved with a deliberate care that seemed at odds with his youth. As he withdrew the instrument, a well-worn acoustic guitar with visible wear on its body but perfectly maintained tuning pegs, his expression shifted subtly. The nervous tension in his small frame didn't exactly disappear, but it transformed into something else, a focused intensity that seemed to draw all his scattered energy into a single, concentrated point. Mrs. Wilkins, who had initially approached with the intention of offering some last-minute encouragement, as she had done for the other students, stopped short. Something in the boy's demeanor, the absolute seriousness with which he regarded the instrument in his hands, made her usual cheerful platitudes seem suddenly inadequate. Instead, she simply asked, "Do you need anything, Prince? A chair? A music stand?" Prince shook his head, still not speaking. Then, as an apparent afterthought, he looked up at her and asked in a voice so quiet she had to lean forward to hear it, "Could I have the lights dimmed? Just a little." It was an unusual request for a junior high talent show, where most performers wanted every detail of their carefully prepared acts to be clearly visible. But something in the earnestness of the request made Mrs. Wilkins nod in agreement. "I'll tell Mr. Peterson in the booth," she said, referring to the science teacher who was manning the minimal lighting controls for the event. "You'll go on right after Jessica finishes her flute solo." On stage, Jessica Matthews was midway through a competent, if somewhat hesitant rendition of Debussy's Clair de Lune, her concentration evident in the slight furrow of her brow. The audience offered supportive attention, parents smiling encouragingly, siblings fidgeting with the restlessness typical of their age. In the front row, Bernadette Nelson sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her expression a complex mixture of maternal pride and concern. As a single mother raising Prince and his sister in challenging economic circumstances, she had made countless sacrifices for her children. Music lessons weren't among the necessities she could provide, which made Prince's self-taught abilities all the more remarkable, and his decision to perform them publicly all the more surprising, given his usually private nature. When Jessica's performance concluded and the applause had faded, the school principal stepped to the microphone. "Thank you, Jessica, for that lovely rendition," he said with the practiced enthusiasm of an educator who had overseen many such events. "Next, we have Prince Nelson, who will be performing." He glanced down at his note cards, then looked up with slight confusion. An original composition. A ripple of murmured interest moved through the audience. Original compositions weren't common in junior high talent shows, where most students opted for the safer territory of recognized pieces. In the lighting booth, Mr. Peterson reduced the stage lights as instructed, creating a softer ambience that immediately shifted the atmosphere in the auditorium. The change seemed to signal to the audience that what would follow might be different from the preceding acts, causing conversations to hush and attention to focus more intently on the still empty stage. For several long seconds, nothing happened. The stage remained vacant, the single microphone stand at its center untouched. The pause extended just long enough that the principal began to glance around nervously, wondering if the next performer had succumbed to stage fright. Then, from stage left, Prince appeared. His entrance wasn't dramatic in any conventional sense. There was no confidence in his posture, no performative flourish to his movement. If anything, he seemed to be fighting the urge to turn and flee. But even in this state of visible anxiety, there was something compelling about the small, barefoot boy carrying a guitar that seemed almost too large for his frame. He approached the microphone with cautious steps, his eyes downcast, seemingly focused on the wooden floorboards beneath his bare feet. When he reached center stage, he carefully positioned himself before the microphone, which had been set for a much taller performer. Rather than adjusting it, which would have required setting down his guitar, Prince simply accommodated to its height, stretching slightly upward to ensure his voice would be captured. The audience, accustomed to the enthusiastic, if sometimes unpolished performances of junior high students, settled into an attitude of patient encouragement. A few parents readied their cameras. Some students whispered among themselves, several pointing or smirking at Prince's bare feet. But all of this external activity seemed to exist in a different reality from the one Prince had entered as he positioned his fingers on the guitar strings. His focus had narrowed to just himself, the instrument, and the music he was about to create. Without introduction or explanation, he began to play. The first notes that emerged from the guitar were not the hesitant, simplified chords typical of a beginner, nor were they a recognizable melody that the audience could immediately categorize. Instead, what filled the auditorium was a complex, rhythmically sophisticated progression that seemed to belong to no particular genre. Elements of blues, jazz, and something entirely original intertwining to create a sound that defied easy classification. The technical proficiency was immediately apparent, even to those without musical training. But what transformed the moment from impressive to extraordinary was what happened when Prince began to sing. His voice, not yet touched by adolescence, carried a clarity and emotional depth that seemed impossible from a 12-year-old. The lyrics, original words to match his original composition, spoke of experiences and emotions that should have been beyond his years. Loneliness, aspiration, the complex relationship between individuality and belonging. Yet there was nothing affected about his delivery, no sense of a child attempting to mimic adult themes he didn't understand. Each word carried the ring of authentic experience, processed and expressed through a talent that transcended his age and circumstances. In the audience, the initial response was stunned silence. The typical shuffling, whispering, and restless movement that accompanied even the best student performances had completely ceased. Parents who had been preparing to offer the polite, encouraging applause that was the standard response to children's performances found themselves frozen, cameras lowered, as they struggled to reconcile what they were witnessing with their expectations of a junior high talent show. Bernadette Nelson, watching her son with tears forming in her eyes, saw not just the child she had raised, but a glimpse of the extraordinary artist he was already becoming. As the song built toward its conclusion, a series of vocal runs that demonstrated a control and range that would have been impressive in a trained adult performer. The emotional intensity in the auditorium had transformed the atmosphere entirely. This was no longer simply a school event, a parade of children displaying developing talents. It had become something else, a moment of genuine artistic expression, of undeniable gift revealing itself for the first time in public. When the final note faded, there was a moment of complete, breathless silence. For 3 full seconds, no one moved, no one spoke, as if the audience collectively needed time to process what they had just experienced. Then, like a dam breaking, the applause erupted, not the polite, encouraging applause of adults supporting children's efforts, but the genuine, spontaneous response to authentic artistry. People rose to their feet, many wiping tears from their eyes, their expressions reflecting a complex mixture of emotions: wonder, confusion, the particular joy of having witnessed something extraordinary and unexpected. On stage, Prince seemed almost startled by the response, his eyes widening slightly as he regarded the standing audience. For the briefest moment, a small smile touched his lips, not a performer's practiced acknowledgement of approval, but the genuine, vulnerable expression of a child who had taken an enormous risk and found acceptance rather than the rejection he might have feared. Then, with the same quiet intensity that had characterized his entrance, he gave a single, slight nod, more to himself than to the audience, and exited the stage, still barefoot, still clutching his father's guitar, leaving behind an auditorium full of people who understood they had just witnessed something beyond the ordinary boundaries of talent and youth. If this story moves you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more moments that define the king of pop's extraordinary journey. Backstage, Mrs. Wilkins waited, her expression a mixture of astonishment and a teacher's pride in a student's achievement. "Prince," she said, reaching out as if to place a hand on his shoulder, but stopping short when she sensed his discomfort with the gesture. That was... She paused, searching for words adequate to what she had just witnessed. "I had no idea you could. What did you learn to play like that? And the song, did you really write that yourself?" Prince nodded, his eyes still focused on the guitar in his hands rather than on his teacher's face. "At home," he said simply. "I practice at home." The understatement was so profound that Mrs. Wilkins found herself at a momentary loss for response. Before she could formulate her next question, the backstage area filled with other teachers and several parents who had abandoned protocol to seek out the young performer who had so completely transformed their expectations of the evening. Principal Anderson made his way through the small crowd, his typical administrative reserve replaced by genuine excitement. "Young man," he said, addressing Prince directly, "I've been running talent shows at this school for 15 years, and I have never," he emphasized the word with uncharacteristic emotion, "never seen anything like what you just did on that stage." Prince looked up finally, meeting the principal's gaze with an expression that combined shyness and a strange, precocious dignity. "Thank you, sir," he said, the formality of his response somehow emphasizing rather than diminishing his youth. "May I go back to my seat now? My mom is waiting." The simple request, so normal, so childlike, created a momentary cognitive dissonance for those who had just witnessed his performance. It was a reminder that despite the extraordinary talent he had just displayed, Prince was still a 12-year-old boy, still navigating the basic structures and expectations of childhood. Principal Anderson nodded, stepping aside to clear a path. Of course," he said, as Prince made his way through the backstage area, Several students who had previously regarded him with indifference or mild derision now watched with expressions ranging from bewilderment to newfound respect. Jessica Matthews, the flute player who had preceded him, whispered to her friend loudly enough to be overheard. "Did you know he could do that? Has he always been able to do that?" Back in the auditorium, Prince slipped quietly into the seat beside his mother. Bernadette placed an arm around his narrow shoulders, pulling him close in a gesture that acknowledged both her pride and her understanding of how much courage the performance had required from her usually reserved son. "They see you now," she whispered, the simple statement carrying layers of meaning that extended beyond this single evening to encompass all the challenges and potential that lay before her uniquely gifted child. The remainder of the talent show proceeded according to program, but a tangible shift had occurred in the atmosphere. Each subsequent performance was received with the same polite encouragement that had characterized the earlier part of the evening, but there remained an undercurrent of collective processing, as if the audience was still attempting to integrate the unexpected revelation of extraordinary talent that had briefly transformed their ordinary school auditorium into something approaching a temple of genuine artistic expression. When the event concluded and families began gathering their belongings and congratulating their children, a small cluster of teachers conferred in the back of the auditorium. Their conversation focused entirely on Prince's performance. Mrs. Wilkins, who had taught music at Bryant for over a decade, shook her head in a gesture of bemused wonder. "I've had him in general music class all year," she said, "and he's always been quiet, attentive, but he's never shown. I had no idea." Mr. Peterson, the science teacher who had managed the lighting, nodded in agreement. "Some talents don't reveal themselves in regular classrooms," he observed. "But what we just saw, that wasn't just talent. That was something else entirely." Principal Anderson, who had joined the small group after overseeing the conclusion of the program, added his own perspective. "I'm going to speak with his mother about music programs, scholarships. There has to be a way to nurture whatever that was we just witnessed." What none of them could fully articulate, but all somehow understood, was that they had been present at a moment of emergence. The first public revelation of a gift so singular that it would eventually transcend all ordinary categories and expectations. In the parking lot outside the school, as families dispersed into the warm June evening, 12-year-old Prince carefully placed his father's guitar in the trunk of his mother's car. Still barefoot, still quiet, he appeared outwardly unchanged by the experience that had just transformed how everyone around him perceived his potential and identity. Yet something had shifted within him, a confirmation of what he had perhaps always sensed but now knew with certainty. That music was not merely something he did or enjoyed, but the essential language through which he would express his understanding of himself and the world. It was a language in which he was already fluent beyond his years, beyond conventional training, beyond the limits that others might perceive as appropriate or possible for someone of his age and circumstances. The Bryant Junior High Talent Show of June 7th, 1970, would be referenced repeatedly in later years by music journalists seeking the origin story of the innovative artist Prince would become, by former classmates who would claim varying degrees of friendship or early recognition of his gifts, by cultural commentators analyzing the development of one of music's most boundary-breaking talents. But for Prince himself, that evening would represent something both simpler and more profound. The moment when his private relationship with music became a public conversation, when the compositions and expressions he had previously shared with no one began their journey into the wider world. It was the first step on a path that would eventually lead to international acclaim, innovative brilliance, and a body of work that would redefine the possibilities of popular music. And it began with a barefoot 12-year-old boy borrowing his father's guitar, finding the courage to reveal his authentic voice despite all the reasons: youth, shyness, socioeconomic barriers, conventional expectations that might have justified keeping it hidden. If you've been moved by this glimpse into the earliest beginnings of Prince's extraordinary journey, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Together, we keep alive the memory of how a single moment, a barefoot boy finding the courage to share his gift, contained within it the seeds of a musical legacy that would eventually touch millions of lives and forever change the landscape of popular music. In a small glass display case in the Minneapolis Music Historical Society, visitors can view a weathered program from the Bryant Junior High School talent show of June 7, 1970. The simple mimeograph sheet lists 23 student performers, their names and planned acts typed in neat columns. Midway down the page, entry number 12 reads simply, Prince Nelson, original composition. Nothing in this humble documentation suggests the significance of what occurred when that particular entry took the stage. No hint that those in attendance were witnessing the first public performance of an artist who would go on to sell over 100 million records worldwide, win 7 Grammy Awards, earn induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and create a body of work whose influence continues to reverberate throughout contemporary music. But perhaps that absence of fanfare is appropriate. Great journeys often begin with quiet steps, and the most profound transformations sometimes emerge from the simplest of moments. A barefoot boy, borrowing his father's guitar, finding the courage to reveal his gift to the world for the very first time.